And so on everything I was going to say does not reflect the views of my institution. So these are my own views, should not be considered official views of the European Central Bank. And I will take in this presentation more the perspective of internationalization of currencies and the role of renminbi in the international monetary system, as seen from Europe, basically. So let me first recall the position of the ECB on the international currencies, on international the euro in particular. So the ECB has a neutral position on the international currencies, and it considers it to be a market-driven process. The pros and cons of having international currencies are difficult to quantify, so probably a big deal to have an international currency or not. So the pros and cons are evenly balanced. There is a kind of a shared idea that a multipolar international monetary system could be a more sustainable solution over the medium term, and provided this transition to the system from the current dollar-centric system is well managed, and the system, meaning the exchange rates, do not become less stable. You know, there is some of you may know that there is an old literature on that. This is called the so-called NERCS instability, because it was an economist called NERCS who first kind of mentioned it. And so there is a kind of fear that that the multipolar system could be also less stable, but it's really not proven. And so it's just I think it's just a a general concern. And so if we envisage a world order with many or several reserve currencies, certainly there is place for the renminbi as being one of them. So this to the next slide, where which basically kind of shows that so we are living in a multipolar world where the importance of emerging markets, in particular China, has been rising considerably. The U.S. is not the only important economic power as it was perhaps in the Bretton Woods times. But still we are in a unipolar international monetary system. It's still centered on the US dollar. The euro is a second international currency, but is very far distant from the dollar. It's also much more regional, so it's really much used more in the neighboring countries to the European Union, and not really globally as the US dollar. There was recently a rise in non-reserve currencies, so currencies which are typically not considered to be reserve currencies. You see this in some indicators. So currencies such as the Canadian dollar, Australian dollar, and renminbi have gone up in importance, but only up to a point. So they have not really they've not really gone up so much as to break the dominance of the major reserve currencies such as the euro and the dollar. As you know, a key recent development was the inclusion of the renminbi into the SDR basket. And there are other new elements, for example, the rising role of central bank swap lines and regional financing arrangements in the provision of global safety nets. I probably don't have time to talk about the three-fin dilemma. It's an important part of the discussion, but it would probably take me too much time to go into. So let's have a look at what makes an international currency. So what characteristics should a country or a currency have to become an international currency? So we know that size is important. So the issuer of an international currency must be a big country with economic weight. It must be characterized by both internal and external stability, meaning basically that it should have low inflation but also stable exchange rate. It should have deep, liquid, and broad financial markets. So this third characteristic is very, very important. So to have really a deep financial market. Financial openness, obviously, is a characteristic of any international currency. So without financial openness, there is no possibility to become an international currency. And also very important, rule of law and property rights. So it must be issued by a constituency which really respects property rights and rule of law. So this has been the case, for example, with the two issuer of reserve currencies in the last 100 years, so the UK first and the US. These have been countries which are characterized by large and liquid financial markets, but also strong rule of law and property rights. So where do we stand briefly on the internalization of the renminbi? So the next two slides show some data. I don't have time to go into the details of that, but basically the renminbi plays some international role, but is still very, very distant from the US dollar and the euro in terms of most of the indicators one normally monitors. So for example, being a global payment currency, or the foreign exchange turnover. Again, this has, has gone up since in recent years, but still we are at a very low level. And the next slide also shows a bit the same. So I don't go into the details, but shows the message is the same, that renminbi is rising but distant from the major currencies. So one interesting development in the last more like a year or two has been that there was a central retrenchment of the international around the renminbi, which might sound counterintuitive, because this was a time in which the renminbi was included in the SDR basket. So some observers were expecting a further rise in the internationalization of the renminbi resulting from the SDR inclusion. But actually, it seems more the opposite has been happening. And I will come to that in a moment, but basically, this has been a difficult period for China in terms of stability. We had the stock market crash, we had the exchange market pressure, capital outflows, and also expectation of a depreciation or potential depreciation of the renminbi. So all these factors have weighed negatively in the short term for further internationalization of the renminbi. But probably these are temporary factors. I wanted to mention briefly that Europe is also kind of working on establishing, so becoming a financial center for the renminbi. In terms of clearing center, probably London is the most important right now, but also Paris and Frankfurt are also important for commercial transaction clearing. And Luxembourg is becoming an important financial hub for the issuance of bonds in renminbi and other financial instruments. So there is a bit distinction in continental Europe that Paris and Frankfurt are important for commercial transactions, and Luxembourg for financial transactions. And also we have direct euro onshore renminbi trading possible since September 2014. Which foreign exchange market experts tell that is important. It's important thing in order to minimize transaction costs. So this comes back a bit to what I was saying before in terms of short-term pressures on China. So this is an indicator we monitor quite a bit. The exchange market pressure, which is a combination of exchange rate developments, interest rate developments, and foreign exchange reserve accumulation. So the idea is, for example, a country which has a fixed exchange rate arrangement, for example, the fact that the currency doesn't depreciate doesn't mean that there isn't no pressure on the exchange rate, because this country may be forced to accumulate a lot of foreign exchange reserves. So this indicator kind of internalizes that and computes basically a total foreign exchange market pressure. And basically, as you can see, there have been two peaks of pressure on China. The first one during 2015, and this was the period of the crash in the stock market and general concerns about China. And there was a second one basically corresponding with the US presidential elections, which seems to have largely abated more recently. And in terms of the stock markets, as we know, so the Chinese market is a yellow line. There was a big crash in 2015, but since basically, I would say early 16, the behavior of the Chinese market has tracked the one world markets quite closely. So basically the fears of another crash or another bubble maybe in the Chinese stock market has largely abated. There have been, as you know, recent carbon capital outflows. So one question is, are these recent decisions on capital outflows relevant for the international order renminbi? Could they stop a further international order renminbi? And we don't think that this is going to be the case. These recent curbs are mostly tightening of existing controls and rather than introducing new controls. They are supposed to be temporary. So the word temporary always is always accompanied by a question mark. And in Italy, we are used to say there is nothing more permanent than a temporary measure, but at least they are considered to be temporary. So we don't see them as having a lasting impact on the international order renminbi. I also wanted to mention, I'm coming close to the conclusion, the role of the China's bond market. So there is probably further room for increasing foreign investors' presence in China's bond market. So, as you probably know, China's bond market is one of the biggest in the world. It is also one of the most liquid in the world, but it is characterized by relatively limited foreign presence. So I mean, a strong international renminbi would require making sure that there are no barriers for foreign investors in that market. I jump over the slide on currency swap arrangements because this was mentioned already by other speakers. So I come directly to the last slide, to the conclusions. So what will matter in the medium term? So what will make or break the renminbi as an international currency? So we believe that in the short term, the stability of the renminbi exchange rate, so the external value of the renminbi, and more generally the Chinese financial system will be paramount. So without a strong stability in the Chinese economy, also in the Chinese financial system, it's difficult to envisage a stronger international role of the renminbi. But provided that basically China's economy keeps stable and avoids crisis, which we all believe it will in the next couple of years, so what will be relevant in the medium term? And so within in the medium term, institutional development in China will be the crucial factor. So the question can be, can China sustain the creation of safe assets? So part of being an issuer of international currency is to be able to issue safe assets, assets which are regarded as safe by global investors. So is the Chinese institutional setting able to develop widely traded safe assets like the US Treasury bonds? And also, can China fully open its capital account without major repercussions and tensions in the rest of the economy? So that remains a question mark. China already does, but can still project more soft power. So not power based on armies and military, but more power based on arguments, convictions, ideas. And I think China is really very well placed to do that. So we Europeans, we always think that we have soft power because we don't have the military power. So we always think that we have soft power, and we insist a lot on that. But I think it's something which China also can have a lot of. And so these are the important questions which go beyond a stronger international order of the renminbi. So in my view, a strong international order of the renminbi should not be conceived as an objective per se, but rather as a factor accompanying overall institutional development of China. And so in this sense, the Japanese experience, I think in the 80s is a useful reminder that pushing the internationalization as an objective as such may not be always successful, although the Japanese experience is complex, so, but probably there are people who are more expert than I am on that. So, so thanks a lot, and yeah, I'm done. Thank you very much, Livio.